there was a very old Tibetan monk there who kind of oversaw everything, and he couldn't speak English, and he wasn't on faculty. They actually had him uh, working in the cafeteria as a dishwasher because that was the only way they could get him hired. As you know, he probably spent his whole life in a monastery in either India or Tibet. And he saw me one night, and he'd never spoken to me before. I didn't really speak, but he grabbed my hands and he pointed at my head and he said, "Too much." And then he pointed to my hands and said, "More." And that was all he said, really. And I said, "Okay." And I realized, like, he thought I should be doing things with my hands more than thinking.
Welcome to the show, Adam.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Nice to be here.
I'm excited to have you on today. I've been diving into your world, and you have a lot of work. And what I have found out about your website, you have even more work that I haven't even seen. And I'm just excited to have you on the show. So thanks for coming.
There's a lot. It's a lot to digest.
Yeah, you're a busy guy. I like that. I like it a lot. So before we jump into any of that work that I have seen or have not seen, let's take a moment and introduce yourself to the audience.
Okay. My name is Adam. I'm here in New York City. I've been here off and on since 1986. I'm originally from Wisconsin. Went to high school in Florida and college in Connecticut, and then I came here. And I've been taking pictures since about 1990. So I don't know how long that is now, 30-some years?
Yeah.
Yeah, quite a long time. 1990 is when I became a photographer.
That's amazing. So were you always kind of into photography as a young person?
No, it was kind of something I knew about vaguely. Cameras were a vague interest, but I had no access to them and I never saw them. I was mostly an academic type person. I studied. First, I was a chemistry major in school. That didn't last too long. I didn't find it that interesting, and I was going to be pre-med, but I ended up studying philosophy and religion undergraduate, and started going to Columbia grad school for Indo-Tibetan studies. Didn't stay there very long. I did a little bit of work at University of Virginia in the same field and didn't stay there very long. It was long and pointless program that I didn't quite know where it was going. I mean, for me, pointless, like 14 years to a PhD, and the only job that I could see at the end of it was either being a professor, or the CIA was very interested in that program and people in it, and they used to recruit, and I didn't want to work for the CIA.
Wow, you could have been a spy.
Okay. Maybe I am.
Easy. That
I didn't want to work for the CIA. It doesn't mean I don't work.
Hey, that is true. Yeah.
I'll be knocking on the door soon.
Why would they be interested in that? Was it just
at the time this was
regional knowledge or what?
late 80s, and China was very into Tibet, and people who knew about that, who could learn the language and speak that kind of thing, who knew about that would be valuable assets, I think.
Yeah, makes sense.
As far as I understand, that's why they were interested, and that was not something I was interested in. So, when I looked around and I was like, I don't know if I can do 14 more years of school and then come out without any prospects of anything other than, doing that. So, I ended up with positions teaching kind of, would say like remedial English and philosophy to NYU and Parsons students, and somehow or another I started going to lectures that they had on campus. As I was kind of quasi faculty at the time, I had a card. I could go to different lectures and see what was going on, and I started going to a lot of photography lectures from mostly commercial photographers that would come and give talks to the students. And I found them really interesting. And I had access to the dark rooms at Parsons because of it. When I started to play with cameras, I could use those. And that was great. I had at Columbia there was a head of the department that I was studying in was a well-known person, but there was a very old Tibetan monk there who kind of oversaw everything, and he couldn't speak English, and he wasn't on faculty. They actually had him uh, working in the cafeteria as a dishwasher because that was the only way they could get him hired. As you know, he probably spent his whole life in a monastery in either India or Tibet. And he saw me one night, and he'd never spoken to me before. I didn't really speak, but he grabbed my hands and he pointed at my head and he said, "Too much." And then he pointed to my hands and said, "More." And that was all he said, really. And I said, "Okay." And I realized, like, he thought I should be doing things with my hands more than thinking. And so I remembered these lectures that I had seen. And I thought, well, I'd like to go and see what one of those studios runs like. So I would call and see if I could get into one of them. I had no idea how to do it. And the first one I called, some European sounding person answered the phone, and I said, yes, I tried to be very polite and introduce myself and say, you know, this is me, who I am. And the person was very impatient and said, uh-huh, uh-huh. And I said, well, I'd like to come in and see how the studio works, if that's okay. And this goes, uh-huh, uh-huh. And, it, and I said, well, when should I come in? It's like, okay, whenever. And I said, how about tomorrow? And he said, uh-huh. And then he just hung up the phone on me. And I said, okay, this is a weird world. But, and so I went there and I showed
Sounds
up.
French. Sorry, my French friends. He sounds French.
It was very similar. He was actually, at the time in the early, this was around 1990, he was a very 89, 90. There's at the time, a very big fashion photographer in New York
Wow.
from Denmark, who shot all the time for Harper's Bazaar and these type of magazines. And there was a whole productions and huge amounts of assistants and things like that. And I showed up, 8 o'clock one morning, and everybody's like looking at me going, who are you? Like, you're not supposed to be here. And I said, well, I called yesterday and I don't remember who I spoke to, but they said I could come in. So they let me in. And everybody just ignored me. And at the end of the day, they just told me, stand in the corner and don't touch anything. Okay. And I thought it was fascinating what was going on. I don't remember what the shoot was, but it might have been like a catalog shoot or something like that. I didn't know. There's girls running around in hair and makeup and film going into cameras and out of cameras and assistants moving quickly and sets being built. Everybody just ignored me except for like one assistant who said, don't touch anything. I said, okay, but this is just fascinating to me. And I said, this is so much more interesting than what I'm doing. And at the end of the day, I looked and I said, when can I come back? And they said, I don't know. I don't care. And I said, I'll come back tomorrow. I have the day off. I'll come back tomorrow. And they said, oh, and I just kept coming back because nobody stopped me from doing it. And then after about 3 months of that, hanging around, slowly, they let me like put numbers on the rolls of film. If they trusted me to let me do that. It took me like weeks for them to let me write a number on a piece of film or put a sticker on it, or even just touch it. I couldn't load a camera. I couldn't do anything. Very, very slowly, I got the ability to just do things, but I'm just spending the whole day watching everything going on. It's unbelievably fascinating to me. And like after 3 months, somebody showed me how to load one of the cameras. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is really amazing. And I was like really scared, but I did it. And then I kind of became an intern for another 3 months. And one day, the first assistant made some mistake, and the photographer got very with the film, and it ruined the film. And the photographer got very angry with him and said, "That's the last time." And he looked over at the other assistants and he looked at me and he goes, "Do you want the job?" And the other second and third assistants were not happy. And I just said, "Yes." So I quit everything I was doing and I showed up the next day and I took over. And that was how I started. And what I realized was this photographer never answered his own phone calls. He never spoke to anybody, but he was the man who answered when I called. And what had happened was, and I only surmise this because I never asked him about it, he must have picked up the phone to dial out. It was a landline, of course, at the time. And instead of finding a dial tone, he found some idiot there talking to him. So he was just going, uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. Because I'd seen him when a client calls and he'd answer the call, he'd just go like this and he would just hang up. Like they'd have to talk to his agent or something. He would never talk to anybody. He was too important. So I just somehow got lucky. And it was through perseverance and not being told no and just assuming that not no was permission. But I just
A tacit approval.
was just, and so I just started learning right there. And I was just like, I just, through fire, I just learned a lot because he was shooting 2 to 3 jobs a day, 6 to 7 days a week. I rarely had time off. After about 6 months of work, I couldn't feel my toes anymore from standing so much. Like my toes were just numb. I, we had to do so much. It was so much work, so much physical work, running and climbing, doing electric work that was completely unlicensed and very, very dangerous. We used huge HMIs that we just patched into fuse boxes in ways that were certainly not legal. But it was fascinating. It was really, really fascinating. And it was all a transparency film at the time. Nobody shot negative. You couldn't make mistakes. You had to be really technical. You had to, I had a color meter in one hand and a flash meter in the other hand. You couldn't be 2/10 of a stop off.
Wow.
So it really was, it was not like digital photography. It was not, and this he got a certain look and he was very guarded about how he got it. And we were not allowed to talk to people about how we got it. We were not allowed to show anybody. We had walls built so that nobody could see how things worked behind the scenes. Yeah, it was quite a thing.
That's fascinating. You
Yeah,
just hung around.
I just
hung around.
I really found it. And then the more time I spent in the studio, because I would go in on days, even when there weren't jobs I had to go in, because I also was studio manager. So I had to take care of the studio. So I would organize all the equipment. I would go through all the stuff. I would organize the archives, all these things. And we were mostly shooting medium format cameras, Pentax 6.7s for most jobs. But in the back of one of the cabinets, there was this big wooden box, and I kept saying, "What is that? What is that?" And I would take it out, and I'd ask the photographer, I'd say, "What is this? What?" And he'd like open it, and it was a Deerdorf, and I said, an 8x10, and I said, "Let's do something with this." I looked at this thing and I said, "Let's do something with this. Let's set it up. Let's shoot something with it." So he started taking it out and shooting with it, and he did a personal project with it that got him some gallery shows and things like that. And I just looked at that camera and I'm like, this is the kind of camera I want to work with. And I scraped up, whatever money. I was paid very, very low. I was paid very, very little to work that job, but back then assistants didn't make very much, but I made even less than most because I had no experience. but it was fantastic. And I scraped up whatever I could. And when I finally could get enough money together, I went over to the local professional camera store, and the guy was very nice to me, and he gave me a good deal on a beat up one. And I started using that for everything. I shot everything at 8x10 Polaroid.
Wow.
Yeah.
8x10s. That's a massive.
Yeah.
That's a big camera.
Yeah, I still shoot 8x10 for 50% of what I do. So.
Wow. Wow. I see. I saw that. I saw that camera in some of the photos that I'd seen of you, and you can even. One of the things I really like about some of your shots is you even leave the frame of the film in there. You can kind of see the holder, the frame holder in it,
Yeah, I'll done
and
that.
so it's so typical large format, and that also shows a lot of skill. When people can do that, I'm like, you know what you're
Framing is
doing.
really, really important to me.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm
No
not a
cropping at all.
photographer. Uh,
Were you ever into like art before this point? Were you into art, photography, looked at any galleries, or was it just something you kind of stumbled into and found this whole other world and just kind of launched you in this direction? So talk to me about that early. Is that something you were into, or how did how did you kind of fall into it?
well, in my family, we had a lot of art on the walls growing
Okay.
up. I know my mother had a Manet lithograph or a drawing. My father had some small Lautrecs and things like that. I mean, nothing like Momo, but real stuff, but not like. So, but there was a lot of other, there were a lot of huge oil paintings, and I don't know, excuse me, who did those. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of art when I was growing up, but it wasn't the kind of thing where I was told about it, but I
Mm,
saw it all the time growing up. So that, did I go to galleries? Probably not.
mm,
Um, Not too much. I don't remember when I started to. Probably in the late 90s is when I started going to galleries. When I started in photography, I wasn't interested in photography as art.
mm,
I was interested in it in terms of because everything that was around what I was doing was commercial still life and commercial fashion. Um, I worked for some of the bigger fashion photographers in New York in the 90s. And that's pretty much, what I knew and what I learned. And um, I'm trying to think of some of the early stuff that I liked that wasn't that. I liked the street work of Roger Main
mhm.
in the beginning. Not that there was a certain grittiness to it. I think that's some of the early stuff that I liked, but I don't remember going to galleries or actually ever seeing any of it. I would see it in books most of all. I really liked the books more than often when I would see a work in person, um, I would like it less than when I saw it in a book.
Why do you think that? Why?
Sometimes when things are larger, you see aspects of it, technical imperfections or things that you didn't know were there. Not that there's anything wrong with those imperfections, but when you see things small in a book, especially the way that the ink is laying on the page, it sometimes tightens everything up. So one of the early artists in photography that I liked was Jeff Wall, and I was really always kind of super impressed by his work. And then I remember seeing one of his light boxes, and I would often get very, like a lot of photographers do, you get very close to the print and you look at it and you realize like it's mushy. It doesn't
Mm.
look close up. You need to stand really, really far back from it. You see the seams because it's several pieces of film. You're like, it's maybe not nice to say, but it looks nicer in a reproduction in a book than it does on the wall.
It's almost like the omission improved its message, you know,
Yeah.
or its feeling. It's like sometimes, and I said this to you before, sometimes simplicity is almost better, and when you kind of put it into a book form, you lose pixels. It happens every time. You lose resolution. You know what I mean? It kind of compacts things, and so
On the other
you
hand,
get,
to give
yeah.
Jeff Wall a little bit of credit, I don't mean to shit on him, but
He's watching right
I
now.
did see an enormous black and white multi-piece, print. I could see the seams on it of the guy mopping, and it was super impressive. I mean, at every level, from every distance, and so it's not always the case, but I mean,
Yeah.
wow, I would like to have a wall big enough to put this on. So
Do you think you also, because of you know, I worked in commercial before, and it's a precision game, you know. It's about maximizing time and nailing it. And so
true.
one of the things that I was always doing in commercial work was tracing the outside of the frame, looking for aberration, looking for everything, you know, before I actually took a shot or got going, and before I would accept one. And so, do you feel like that's probably a little bit of why when you go and see one big, you're seeing all this, you're just like, this wouldn't have ever passed me, you know? Like, is that kind of what you think is going on?
Uh, it could be. I remember another photographer friend and I went last summer or the summer before to the Met here because the Beckers had a big retrospective, and every excuse me, everyone's a fan of the Beckers. I am especially, not especially, but I definitely am. Um, and I really wanted to see what was there. I mean, it was a very popular show. Um, you know, the modern prints were very nice, less special than, almost too perfect. I think their son made them or had them made. I'm not sure. The vintage ones were really nice, but it's funny because my friend, who's also a very good photographer and, very good in the darkroom, we both went and we both just stared like very closely at the prints. And, at the end, we're like, how many pieces of dust did you see? And I'm like, I said, well, I found two pieces of dust. He found one. So together we found three, which hadn't been spotted out. So I'm like, but, but the worst thing was the copy, the print that was on the cover of the book that the Met did and the print in the show didn't match,
Mm.
meaning they cropped the print in the show. They cropped the
Oh,
top of it in the worst way. They cropped like a millimeter off of it, but it completely threw off the composition and it made the top too close to the border, and it drove me insane. And
wow.
one
You know,
one
I do that
of the
same
security guards came up to us because he saw us talking, and he's like, "What do you notice about these pictures?" So we start telling him what we noticed, and he's like, "No, no," because he hadn't noticed these things. And so we finally said to him, because we gave him like 10 things that we noticed about it, and he finally said, "Well," I said, "Okay, so what is it that you noticed that we didn't notice?" And he said, "Well, there's no people in them." And we
thing.
both went, "No, there's three people over there." We took them to all the different ones. There's people all over the place in some of them,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and you just don't notice them. And I'm like, so yeah, we really do notice things.
Yeah, yeah.
He
You
said,
know,
"Oh,
it's
there's are people in there. Yeah, they're far in the background, but there's people in there."
yeah, it's well, and I think probably what that security guard was noticing was the people weren't the subject.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
and if you
yeah,
didn't
yeah,
look closely and you didn't think
yeah.
about it, you might have seen cars, but you certainly
Yeah.
wouldn't have seen people. And if we hadn't been looking for dust, we probably would never have noticed it. I could just seen those pictures in the book, I would never have known that there were people in them. And there were very few of them. I mean, there were very few pictures with people in them. But
That's
but he might have
it's
been more used to not to seeing pictures with people, because that's another thing is, I have a series that's finished, but was called Single Story. And one of the things that was difficult about Single Story is I had no cars, no people, and
Mhm.
shooting buildings in New York without people is quite difficult.
Yeah. You'd probably have to get up really early for that.
Yeah, a lot
Yeah.
of very early days for that, and even then there was always somebody. So
Yeah. 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 You know what's interesting is I'm listening to you, and I think it seems like you're just as much of a fan of the craft as you are kind of the whole story. So it's like I do the
yeah,
same thing. I because I think it's probably because I was a commercial photographer for some time, but I don't know what to relate it to. But I definitely do that very same thing. I get up really really close. I get in between the grain, and I kind of check it out and see if it's a soft if it's soft or not. You know, it's soft focus.
when I learned all this stuff, as I said, it was all E6. There was nothing called Photoshop. There was no retouching.
Yeah.
The first time I ever heard it, I remember one art director telling the photographer said, we have to reshoot it because of this. And the art director said, I think we can get that side text. Meaning there was like some piece of scrap on the ground next to the model. And it was like, and I was like, what is Cytex? And Cytex was, the early way to retouch digitally. But you couldn't make that kind of mistake. It
Yeah.
just wouldn't be accepted. But then like, I think, and he said, it's $800 an hour, but I think they can afford it for this one.
Interesting. So let me ask you this:
Mm.
You got your shot as an assistant. You kind of started to work with that photographer.
Mm.
How did you progress, and how did you develop? I'm kind of curious about that part of it, of your story. Did you kind of you said you worked with many of the uh, photographers there in New York.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about how you started to develop your skill. You bought that camera for yourself, and so give me that background.
At the time, I was working for largely fashion photographers. I'd say 20% of the work was still life that I was assisting on, and a little bit of it was celebrity. Some of it was music. I realized I had no interest in shooting for music, even mostly I like music. I don't like the business, so I didn't want to be involved, excuse me, involved in that. Still life was really boring to assist on. So I didn't want to do it. Uh, and fashion was, good paced. I like the technical aspect of it. At the time I understood the clothes, I understood the hair, and I understood the makeup. Um, and so I did that for a while, and I had some amount of success in New York doing that. Um, I used to shoot front of the book stuff for American Vogue
Mm.
in 94 and 95, I think. Um, and I shot fashion in London in 95 and 96. I even lived there for a little while. I shot for the weekend magazines and the newspapers and things like that. I had some big stuff, relatively big stuff. Um, but it took a while, but I realized that I was, having worked with the very top people, I realized I would never get there. Um, I I just didn't have the personality for it, and a lot of it was personality driven. And when I looked at my own work, I realized it wasn't as anywhere near as good as those people's work, and I thought I don't really have enough interest in this to just become a mediocre fashion photographer who's kind of, you know, not as excited by his own work as he is by others. I can't do this anymore, and I realized like I stopped doing it. Um,
Mm.
and I thought, what does interest me? So I just started taking pictures of things that interested me, and things that interested me were what was around me. and it was mostly just things. So they were more meditative ways of trying to understand what was around me, and looking at the light and looking at the kind of returning a little bit more to the type of academic studies that I had, which was, you know, my relationship as a viewer to the world, and things like that. And there really was not very much commercial aspect to it, so I just kept shooting it for myself. Um, and every once in a while, you know, art directors would ask me what I'm working on, and I would show it to them, and they would be very interested in it, but there would be no commercial aspect to it, so I just didn't get any work from it. And I did that for most of the rest of the 90s. It ended up veering towards architecture. Um, Most of the 90s architectural photography that you saw was very heavily lit, idealized spaces. And if you went to those spaces, they never looked like what the pictures of them look like.
Yeah.
So I didn't quite understand that. And I knew vaguely how to do that, but I didn't want to. So I started doing interiors in a way that they look like what they actually look like, but as good as I could possibly make them. So natural light, or very minimally modified available light, or the light that was there. Um, and then you would start to understand rooms, you would start to understand times, you would start to understand how things work. Each room would have its own place that the room would tell you where to stand to take the picture. The room would tell you what it wanted to show you. And, in that sense, it kind of fell together quite easily for me. It felt much more natural. And I think things were changing towards the late 90s. So some of the magazines started to become more interested in that way of seeing things, a little bit more natural way of seeing things. And then there was a move in the 90s towards color negative film also, which made that type of photography a lot more interesting, where you didn't have to supplement the light, which you would have to do with chromes often, uh, especially to get the light balance and the color balanced. So that all worked in my favor, and slowly architecture and interior magazines became interested in me and slowly started asking me to do things. There was a magazine called Architecture, which was quite highly regarded at the time, that I really, really wanted to work with, because they weren't like Architectural Digest. Um, and the creative director there always had a interesting relationship with me. She would call me up and say she liked the work, and then she'd say, "Adam, I like your work, but why should I hire you?" And I'd say, "I don't know. It's Tuesday. I have better things to do than to be answering your questions. I mean, isn't that your job to figure out why you should hire me? And
Did you say that?
you haven't been hiring me, so I don't know." I said, "Why don't you just try it and see what happens? What's the worst that can happen?" And eventually she did, and the first shoot that I had for them ended up being the cover of the magazine, and I just kept shooting for them for the next 3 or 4 years, I think, until, well, maybe 5 or 6 years. It was a while that I shot for them quite often, and that built up a lot of my portfolio. They gave me a lot of chance, and then some architects started to take it seriously because they saw it in there.
Wow.
So that was good. And
So
then at point Dwell started hiring me also, when Dwell became a thing. There's a magazine called Dwell. I think they still exist. And so I became one of those people who gave Dwell its kind of look in the early days. Um,
yeah, I recognize both of those. Both of those magazines for sure. I guess my question is um, that's a really quite interesting kind of traverse through the kind of development of your practice. And
and,
when did you drop the academic stuff? Was it while you
well,
were
the
assisting?
day the day that the day that I was offered the job to assist because that was a full-time job.
And you were
I
like,
don't,
I'm out. I got to go.
yeah, I'm out.
Wow. And then you just never looked back. Wow.
No, I
You
don't.
know, I
But
think we all need a Tibetan monk in our life to tell us,
yeah.
you need to start using your hands and not your head.
I've tried to
Uh,
do that to other people, but they have not been listening to me. So,
Maybe you should just use 2 words like he did.
or I need a
Yeah.
rogue.
Yeah. Less
My back,
this,
my
more
back.
this. Yeah,
No,
exactly.
it worked really well for me because a lot of my problems cleared up.
Really?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? What do you
Um, when you think too much, you don't exist in the real world, and
That's
so
so
you
true.
and so a lot of the problems are imaginary, or
Absolutely.
most problems, not all, but a lot of problems, if you ignore them, they don't exist.
Yeah.
And the ones that actually go away means you just imagined them the whole time.
Yeah.
You know.
That's fascinating. And then when you started getting into it, it was wow, that's quite amazing. They do say that once you start using your hands, you become more grounded, you become more present,
Yeah.
and you become more here in that regard. I think a lot of people that spend a lot of time in their head or have those afflictions of anxiety and depression, they're very much in their head. Art or some kind of way of expressing yourself is a great way to kind of bring yourself back. I had a conversation with someone recently, an artist that uses it in that way,
Yeah.
and so that's absolutely fascinating. So, did you ever? So you just started practicing and developing your craft in that regard. In you, other than the little bit of workshops or classes or lectures that you attended, you just developed your style and your work on your own. You just kind of developed by working with assistants and stuff like that. So you didn't go to art school or anything for it. You just kind of jumped in and you went for it. That's amazing. I love that. Am
Yeah.
I right? Or did I miss something? Did you ever end up going back or didn't feel the need for it?
So nothing particularly against art school, but my first impression of art school was negative, mostly because, as I said, the first studio that I ran as a manager assistant was one of the more popular ones, and we would get tons of resumes like daily. People wanted to work for us, and anyone who I interviewed that had gone to art school was useless. Mostly they, excuse me, showed themselves to be useless on the interview. But if I ever gave one of them a chance and let them come in, I realized that everything that they learned in art school was wrong in terms of technically. Um,
Mm,
it, it was all wrong, but they were also convinced it was right. So they became much harder as an assistant to work with. And so I thought, if this is what they're teaching in art school, I don't really want any part of it because it has no application,
mm,
at least in this world. Um, and then a lot of the work that I'd seen that, they would show that their portfolios, and I go, well, this looks like probably what their teachers' work looked like, who were probably popular in the 70s.
mm.
So I don't, I'm like, I don't see your personality. I don't see your art here. I don't see anything. I see a technical copy of somebody else's work that I don't know, that wasn't interesting particularly anymore to me. I don't know. I'm not saying anything nice, but I didn't see the
No,
point of
it's
I didn't
makes
see
sense.
the point of it. When I was young and I really wanted to go to college, my mother was from a generation who thought that trade school was um, a lot more useful than college. And it stuck in my head because nobody really had ever told us when we were young that going to college was not really a good idea. Especially nobody would have told us to go to trade school. We look down on trade school. And after going to a very fancy college for 4 years, I thought, this is worthless too. I mean, I should have, and then learning photography, while being paid very little of it, through fire, I go, this is a much better education, because this is, I was basically an apprentice
Practical.
for 6 months and then being paid half wages for the next year. I said, this is, I'm not in debt. I'm making enough to kind of pay my rent and get a beer. And I'm seeing everything at the top. I mean, this is how the world really works in this world. So I
Yeah.
thought this was a lot better. And I didn't, I was like, why do I want to go and spend, 40, 50, $60,000 to go and learn from someone who I don't know that they're going to be able to teach me anything?
Mm, interesting. It's definitely something I relate to. I understand that perspective a lot. It's interesting how you developed yourself, and trial by fire is something that's, I think, very, very helpful. And the practical part of photography is one of my favorite parts. Just getting in there and doing it, and learning and making mistakes and working with other people. And I learned
Yeah.
very quickly
Right.
that photography at a high level is a team sport.
Yeah.
So it's not a solo genius. It sometimes it can be, you know what I mean, but rarely.
It
And
requires
so,
good help. I have a lot
what?
of
Go ahead.
I have a lot of help. I rarely am able to do anything completely by myself.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
takes a lot. There's a lot behind the scenes going on. There's a lot of support.
yeah. It's well, and kind of learning that way, I think is I don't know, just as useful um, as as uh, as any school would be. And what's so funny is we're at a time now where a lot of these institutions are being questioned in the first place. So it's fascinating to kind of hear that perspective. But now I'm curious, and now we get an opportunity to look at your work. So
Well,
let's take a look at some of the images that you have. And this is a mock-up of a book, correct?
yes.
Okay, cool.
So the beginning of it is just a quick look through different bodies of work that I have that are all interrelated. Um, this is a very early picture. I think it's from late 90s of
Yeah.
an empty lot on 13th Street. Um, this is from a series called Downtown Architecture. Uh,
Are all these 8 by 10?
mm, this is 8 by 10. This is roll film, 6 by 7 roll film.
Yeah, that look like roll
The
film.
left one is 8 by 10. The right one is shot on a Rolleiflex, I think. So that's 6 by 6. The left one here is from a series called Trees of New York. That tree is taken down by a storm. The right one is from another series called Glamorous New York. This is from Urban Jungle. This is also roll film.
So what inspired you to bring the book together? Like you started to put these into a
Well,
series. It's like pulling from different projects. What
yeah.
what inspired you to do that?
Well, it's always, this work has always been meant to be seen together, but in different volumes. So I've been looking for someone to publish all of the work, but grouped together. Um, I didn't start these projects out individually. I didn't come up with an idea for them and then start shooting them. I started shooting them and then realized what they were as I continued, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I didn't sit down one day and think, I should I've got this great idea for this project called Glamorous New York, and I'm going to start finding things that I think are glamorous, and I'm going to take pictures of them, and it's going to make sense. I think what happened is, like, this picture on the right is the radiator outside my apartment, and I looked at it and I go, I really like this radiator. My hallway is really, really narrow. How do I capture this feeling of this radiator? I mean, and so I just played around with it until I got a picture that I liked. What is it that I like about it? You might think the title is tongue in cheek, but really, I'm not originally from New York. I came here, and one thing that I found the city very glamorous when I came here in the '80s, but it was dangerous and ugly and dirty
Yeah.
and crime ridden. I used to see people getting held up at knife point. I would be out late at night, and I would not walk down the sidewalk. I would run in the middle of the streets. Um, you know, it's slowly being abraded away, but so that type of glamour is disappearing, I guess. Um, so where I can still see it, I'm just trying to record it. Um, this one here is from the Empty Lots project. The Empty Lots is probably the first project that I started. Um, I have stories about how I started this project. I I'm not sure which of them are right and which of them are wrong because I started them so long ago. I don't know what really started me doing it. The one that I like to tell is that I was living in Alphabet City on 3rd Street, and half of my block was just empty lots. And I was doing a lot of commercial architecture work on mostly shot on 4x5 cameras. And I really wanted to do something just for myself. And so I thought, well, I should shoot what's around me. And I said, well, why don't I shoot, instead of shooting a thing that an architect wants me to shoot, why don't I shoot not a thing that not an architect doesn't want me to shoot on a bigger camera? So the closest thing to me was the empty lot next to me. And I took out the 8x10 camera and I set it up, and all the guys that hung out on my stoop were yelling at me, saying, there's nothing there, there's nothing there. And I thought, well, I must be onto something. So I started doing that, and nobody was interested in it. This is back in 2000 or whenever. I mean, really nobody was interested in it. I showed it to people. They're like, nice, Adam. And change the subject. I got no commercial interest in it. Nobody had any interest in it whatsoever. But for some reason, I found them interesting. A lot of my work is either about a thing or not a thing. This left picture here is from Urban Jungle. For me, Urban Jungle was done as there's not a lot of greenery in New York, especially down here, but some places there are. And spending time in those places is a bit refreshing, but you are always somewhat mm, you always know the city is around you. You hear it, you see it somewhere, you see a building somewhere. You're never completely like in the woods. So in every picture in the Urban Jungle, it's about the feeling of being as completely immersed in nature as you can be while still having the city peek in. So the picture on the left here, you probably can't see it here, but on the top right behind those vines, there's a building right there. And when, if you saw a large enough print on that, you would notice it.
I let you slide away on that last statement, which was your work is about a thing or not a thing.
Yeah.
What do you mean by not a thing?
Well, this is not a thing.
It's totally a thing.
Yeah, but it's also not a thing. There's always something.
What do you mean by that? Like, I'm curious about what you're saying.
Well, it's an emptiness. The thing here is not a thing. It's an emptiness. There's nothing there.
Huh.
So that's why those guys were yelling at me. There's nothing there. So it's positive or negative, male or female.
Interesting.
Here's a thing that's also not a thing.
I love this image. Love this one.
Yeah.
I'm a
So it's
big
just
fan of the gradient of the light that kind of just fades it to a shadow. It's really I'm a big fan of that one.
so it's a thing.
Not a thing.
It's
Not
not
a
a
thing. What
because
what's got your attention there? What like I photograph like this sometimes.
well, it's a very ornate old facade for an elevator, but
Yeah.
what's around it is weathered and crappy. If you look at the wall around where the thing is, um, it's typical of some buildings. Well, some that still exist in my neighborhood. Um, it's like a very old lady that still dresses up when she goes out. You know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it looks, and her apartment's very dark, and so she puts on heavy makeup, and then when she goes out into the sunlight, you see that, or an old man, um, who puts on heavy makeup before he goes out.
You
We
know,
have we have
we have a lot of that here in Paris.
yes.
We have a lot of that. Very chic, dapper, like
I always really like Quentin Crisp. If you don't know who Quentin Crisp is, he was an English. I don't know how you would describe him, raconteur actor or what he was, but I remember seeing a very humorous interview with him with someone that they went. Maybe it was the BBC went to his house, and it was covered in dust, and he said, "I never clean up. The dust just keeps settling over everything," and so that idea always stuck in my head. Like, I don't like old buildings when they've been power washed. I like when layers of dirt just build up. I don't wash the windows in my apartment. They're almost opaque with city dust, but it filters the light in very nicely. Um, yeah, I mean, when things are new, it's fine for them to be clean. And sometimes I do vacuum my apartment though, and I do dust.
yeah. Thank you.
And I have washed myself from time to time. So what
Well,
you
that's good.
hear about that is not
I'm
true.
glad we're very clear about all that. And I'm
Yes,
sure your cameras
I'd
are
like to put
spotless.
that on the
So,
record.
yeah,
Oh, yes, my cameras are very, very
yeah. Yeah, well, I appreciate that. But no, there's a magic about wear, and something that's old that you can feel the time on it, which is I think is quite interesting.
This picture is it's not the first empty lot. I don't think it is. At one point, right after 9/11, I had to move out of the apartment that I was in right after 9/11, and until I found another one, I crashed at a friend's place in Long Island City for 2 weeks, and he was in a rock and roll band, and it was impossible to sleep there during the night. So around 5 p.m., I would just take my camera out and I would wander around until 5 a.m. And I think this was one of the first nights I went out, and I just found this space. And I really liked it, and I didn't know why. Maybe because there was, again, not really a thing there, but it was not really a thing filled with things. So I was really like this picture.
What do you think that's I want to get to the root of that, and I don't know if you have an answer for that. It's like when it seems like you're very precise and you're very technical. You notice almost everything.
Mm.
Do you think that's you're looking for not a thing, that ambiguity? You think that's in response?
Well, this thing, not a thing, is something I've only realized,
Really?
recently. I didn't think about it at the time. I photograph things only because I like them, and only because when I see it, it strikes me in a certain way, thinking I would like to photograph this. That's really what it comes down to. I spent a lot of time as a commercial photographer where somebody would call me and say, "We would like you to take a picture of this," and it wasn't really up to me to say I like it or I don't like it. Um, I would do it. I mean, of course, if they paid, but so I had to find something about what I was asked to shoot that I liked.
Yeah.
Uh, but for this, it was only what I liked, and it, it's completely. There's no thought into it whatsoever. It's completely surface level for me. It's completely aesthetic. I like this or I don't like it. I don't think about why I like it or why I don't like it.
And so this realization came to you how? How did you start to kind of you said that was a kind of a recent revelation.
Um, because in the last several years, people have been asking me the type of questions you're asking me, why I do things. Because when I have to put work together and put words down to enter my work for consideration for a book or for a show, people want to know things. Um, and so you make up a story, and you make up a story so that people can understand, and then
Yeah.
you do things in a way to have it make sense to them, because it makes sense to me when I look at the pictures, but it doesn't mean that it makes sense to anyone else.
Yeah, it's true.
So I approach the truth with these words. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to dissemble or to distract, but the the actual truth is, if there's a reason, it's subconscious, and I was never really looking to, I'm not trying to work out a trauma or anything else. I'm a visual person, and um, certain things, excuse me, attract me visually, and I'd like to record them. I
Yeah, it's
it doesn't
it's like especially when you photograph based off of feeling and you kind of know what to take a photograph of. The question of why isn't necessarily the question you should ask sometimes. And so it's interesting to hear you say that. So how do you even describe or write about the subconscious? You know what I mean? Especially a subconscious.
Well, the best way that I found to do it is to let someone else do it,
Is really
and that way, whatever they say is either correct or they made it up, but I didn't say
vrai ou faux en français. Is it true or false? Yeah, you're like, nah, you missed it. Yeah.
I've read a lot. I've read several interviews where I've given them, and then they come out in print, and it says, "Well, Friedberg says this very pointedly," and I go, "Friedberg never said that." I, I know I never said that, but what they did was they condensed things that I said into a pithy thing, and I said, "I guess you can take that from what I said," but I never
Mhm.
actually said those words, and I'm like, "Huh."
Mhm.
So, um, yeah. I mean, you can look at these lots and you can see, oh, it's a screed against the changing of New York, or you can see it as it's all about the resurgence of New York from the dirty old New York to the beautiful new New York. Um, I have no position on that. I mean, change is what happens. I just started shooting them. The one on the right here next to the 7-Eleven is interesting because you don't know where the lot is. This playground is a basketball court on between 3rd and 4th Street and 6th Avenue. That's not the lot. The lot is actually this little alley here,
Mhm.
um, which uh, the I don't know if he's still the director, but then director of Center of Architecture, who found out about this project, asked me, "Hey, did you ever shoot that lot over around the corner?" And I'm like, "What lot are you talking about?" I never noticed it, but when I looked up on the city maps, I go, yeah, this is a separate parcel of land between here and here. And I said, huh. And then I found that there's several of them around the city like that. There was a famous artist um, who, every time I bring this up, his name escapes me, but did a book on this in the 70s, where he bought up these tiny parcels of land that were left over by the way things were divided up in the city, and that these tiny little parcels were. His name will come to me. He's very, very good. I just can't think of it right now, and I never can. Anyways, so because of that person told me about it, I thought, oh, let me add that to the collection. So I went and shot that one.
Wow. So this artist.
A nice young man offered to sell me drugs while I was shooting this one. It was on 15. I didn't buy the drugs that he was offering.
Well, that's good. That's good to know. You could be like Bill Clinton. You know what I mean? I smoked it, but I didn't inhale. You know what I mean?
But he was very polite in his offerings.
Yeah, very. um, but that's so he bought up the little individual pieces that you can buy them.
Well, I don't know about now, but in the 70s or the 80s, whenever this artist did it, he did buy them up. I think a lot of them were in Queens. I will have to remember his name. It's quite well known project. But yeah, he bought them up, and the director of the art center knew this project. He said, "Oh, you must know this project," and I'm like, "I didn't go to art school. I didn't know that project." But then I had heard of that artist, and yes, it's quite well known. But I added 2 or 3 of these tiny little ones into the project based on um, that recommendation, because I would not have thought of these as lots.
That's
But
really
the
interesting.
lots themselves aren't, it's not necessarily that they're lots, it's that they are unused interstitial spaces, let's put it that way. And that's kind of what the project is more about. What happens when nothing is happening?
Yeah.
Lots are just one way to look at it. There's a lot of alleyways that are unused. There's a lot of, like a commercial car lot is not an empty lot for me because it's being used. A commercial car lot that's gone out of business and sits there for 6 months is an empty lot to me. You've
Yeah.
not
Yeah. Yeah.
that space.
Yeah.
Um, I this particular project got into more of a high gear during COVID shutdown because there was nobody on the streets, and I could then photograph more often later into the day, so later into the morning, where this block right here is in Chinatown would normally absolutely be 24/7 completely parked up with delivery trucks. I had a good long window here with nobody coming by, and so I was able to get a picture here. This was early into COVID shutdown, this picture. Uh, this picture is not really important, but um, where this lot, where this a building had just come down here, and the building was owned by King Ad Rock from Beastie Boys. I think I
Oh
have,
yeah.
and that's kind of what made this interesting to me because I was a big Beastie Boys fan.
Yeah.
And he sold that, and then I think what happened to it was the guy he bought it from demolished it without permission to build a huge hotel there without permission, and then it got stalled and it sat empty for many, many, many years. Um, so yeah, that's the other thing. I mean, developers sometimes they speculate on places, they demolish, and then they run out of money, or they find out that their speculation was illegal, or all these type of things happen. Anyways, there's all kinds of reasons for these lots.
So does the story of the lot actually make a difference to you, or do you
No,
just
I wouldn't have known that one, but actually, this is one of the few that I do know the story of.
yeah.
Again, a lot of people who would do a project like this would really be into the history of everything like that. Um,
I don't know. I don't know.
I, I wouldn't. I just am not. I don't want to know sometimes.
Yeah.
what's that thing? You don't want to meet your heroes because you don't want to find out. Like, I don't want to find out the sad story of why I shouldn't be photographing this lot or who was, murdered there. Or, um,
So, what is the text that you're including in here?
the text is placeholder text. Some of it is from artist statements.
Mm.
Some of it's been written by other people. Um, it's just to give people an idea of what each thing is. I haven't reread any of it in a while, probably, you know. Again, as I was saying before, it's trying to put words to something that there aren't really words to. So this is single story. Single story is another project that I did. Here it says 2015 to 2019. That's pretty much correct, I believe. Single story came about. Well, there's a reason for it, which is because I broke a tooth one day eating a potato chip, but it wasn't a potato chip, but it was a too hard vegetable chip. It was like a bag of potato chip type things, and I bit into it and I broke one of my front teeth. And it was, if you break a tooth, it's quite, it kind of hits your soul a little bit. You're like, my body is falling apart.
It's true.
So it made
Yeah.
some kind of psychological trauma on me, which, I got through my day. I was okay. But it stuck in my head. And one day, not long after that, I was crossing the street and I saw this view. This is near where I would get out the subway to go home. And I crossed this view and I saw this McDonald's in the Continental, which was a bar. This is St. Mark's Place, which is famous in East Village, and this is 3rd Avenue going down to the Bowery. And I saw this view and I thought, that looks like my smile. I said, I got to take a picture of this.
And it started a whole.
And it started a whole thing. I said, look, it's even
Yeah.
broke like places like my tooth was.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
And then after that, I showed the picture to someone and they said, oh, this is really interesting. The single stories are interesting as structures. You should do more of it. And I go, I don't know. I want to do more of the empty lots. And they go, no, do more of the single stories. That's definitely, this was a book editor. They wanted to do a book on it. They said, definitely do more. How many do you think there are? And I go, I don't know, 15 or 20 of them. I had no idea. And I said, I know there's a couple others. And then eventually I defined an area, which was my neighborhood, and there were 97 of them.
Oh,
And
wow.
it just took me forever. And for whatever reason, I did it on 5x7 black and white film. Why did I do that? I don't know. I thought the way that I do choose a camera and film for a project is I first see a thing that I want to photograph and I think, what's the proper film and format for this?
Yeah.
And I just go from there. Um,
Well, it seems like if you were to include color, you kind of lose
yeah.
the.
So the story that developed up around single story, came from the trauma of my broken tooth, and then realizing how vulnerable these buildings are because they're all, these are gone. A lot of the ones that I photographed are gone. This one's also gone. The smallest ones are the weakest because they're not architecturally significant. They're basically placeholder buildings. The air rights are worth so much. People want to build up in Manhattan because Manhattan's a vertical city. All these things are true, but they have nothing to do with my photographic process or thinking. So this is all the icing on the cake that I didn't bake. Um,
Hmm.
it's true, but irrelevant in a certain way to me and to why I did it.
It's no, it's definitely interesting considering the contrast and the tension between the vertical city and the
Yeah.
interspersed single stories.
Yeah.
It's the lot photo without the lot.
Yeah, so it's basically the smallest thing that could be in a lot.
Look at that. That one's great.
Yeah.
Oh, that
This
cats.
was the Cats was a story because if I actually went back and redid this one recently because they built so the story was the owner of Cats owned all the buildings around him, and they were all 1 or 2 stories all around him. I think there were a total package of 14 buildings, and at one point, he sold them all for something like $80 million, um, and part of the deal was that cats could stay. So now they've got huge condos all around them. You can't see any of the stuff behind anymore. It's just huge new condos that look like this one over here. And Cats is still there, and it's you know, line of tourists outside every day for
Yeah, it's super famous.
$35 Reuben or what
Yeah, yeah.
it was
How much?
a lot of juicy meat. $35 for a sandwich or something. Maybe more. I don't know. It's quite expensive,
What?
but you get a lot of meat on it.
That justifies 35. Okay. Do you like cats? Do you like cats?
Are they listening right now?
I don't
I've
know if
seen
you follow my show.
I used to.
Yeah,
Um,
you used to. Yeah.
you know, like a lot of things, it's not what it was. I think they've been sold on, and it's well, I mean, it's better than other things like it. So, but yeah, it's very expensive, and I have film that I need to buy.
That's a good down the middle answer. I appreciate that. Yeah, there you go. No, you have a very famous landmark here. There's a lot
Yeah,
of
so
people.
that's good.
Yeah.
This, I mean, is a single story. You don't think it is. It's huge. It's a brutalist thing that was taken down along with all the buildings next to it. To the right of to this side of it. These were all taken down. They were owned by the Catholic Church. It was derelict for 10 to 12 years and it was finally taken down. Everyone hated this building. I liked it. Everyone else hated it. I'm one of the few people that like brutalist architecture that's not into architecture, but everyone who's not into architecture hates brutalist architecture. They think it's a monstrosity. But I had an intern. A lot of times, my interns were architecture students or young architects who really were just wanted to learn photography. And so this intern architect said to me, "Did you ever shoot that one over there? Because this is kind of across the street from where I live." And I said, "Well, no, it's like 3 stories. You can see it." And he goes, "No, look it up. I bet you it's a single story. Most of the churches and things like that are actually single stories. They're." I said, "No, they're not." And I looked it up, and it was a single story. So it
Oh,
got shot.
wow.
Um, there's even some that are super tall. This is a string of single stories. A lot of them are old garages. Um, so downtown architecture is a reaction to single story, which is single story was really hard. As I said, no cars, no people. Have to wake up 4 in the morning to go and set up. Figure out when there's not going to be a car there. Figure out when there's not going to be a person there. Most days I came home with nothing. It was really, really, really hard to get all 90 plus shot over those years. Um, that said, when I was walking around, I saw a lot of buildings that were interesting and I wanted to shoot them. And I didn't want to have it to be quite so. So I got, I tried to figure out a way to shoot these. The single story was shot on 5x7 film. These are all shot on 6x7 or 6x9 roll film on a technical camera that I handheld. Um, I tried to find different ways to do it. I finally had a camera maker make me a prototype that did the type of things that I needed with a viewfinder so that I could just handhold it and shoot the building as I was passing. If there was nothing obstructing my view, I could just shoot it, within a minute, just hand holding it, 3 quick frames, and then be off to the next one. And I did that for a long time. I guess I started, excuse me, in 2016. Um, kind of still going on it, but I've kind of stopped mostly because everything is covered in graffiti now.
Mm.
And when I do shoot buildings now, mostly I'm shooting graffiti more than I'm shooting buildings, and I'm not that interested in graffiti. So I kind of, as I said, I shoot things because I like them. And if things are too covered in graffiti, I don't like them anymore.
Is
And since I,
you said it's getting worse?
yeah, the graffiti's, well, I mean, not in the last, but since shutdown, since the COVID shutdown, things just started getting tagged more and more and more and more and more. Um, and they're not getting cleaned up.
Wow.
What the reasons for that are, I don't know. But these type of, like, you see, there's graffiti on most of these buildings, but it's not really a problem. Like this building probably now would be all tagged over here. It just really changes the feeling of it. Yeah, these would all be tagged up now. So, all right, we'll go. You mentioned something before about why do you shoot this and why do you shoot that, and did you ever think about it? Well, really, I think the reason that people shoot things, or I'm going to abstract it to everyone else, everything is a self-portrait. I think it's true for other people. I don't know that. I know it's true for me. Everything I do reflects me somehow, and
What
the way I see myself. So I'm really self-obsessed. I'm really selfish, and this is the kind of view that I have of myself. These buildings are both grand and decrepit, um, plain, unusual,
It's
past
interesting.
past their prime. Maybe could use a new coat of clothes or something.
Would you
Yeah.
say they're uh
It's
one thing,
a low opinion of myself, and
but at least it's an authentic, honest one.
it's also, I've been in New York for this, to a point where I kind of consider myself a New Yorker. So I see them as kind of like their days in New York are numbered, and so is mine. So are mine. So are mine.
That's
Like,
interesting.
how much longer can they hang on?
It's interesting too. It's the way you're capturing it without cars and people. It's very it reminds me of At J, honestly. Um,
Yeah, somebody, I never really paid a lot of attention to Ajay until maybe 2019. One of my neighbors saw some of my work and said, "Oh, you're like the East Village Ajay," and I'm like, "Wait, is that a compliment or is that?" And so I started looking up his work more, and I knew who he was, of course. And I started looking up his work, and I go, "Holy shit, that's a really nice compliment. I need to that I really have something to reach for now." And
yeah,
at this point where I think he may be my favorite photographer. Um,
it's got that feel to it. But I think part of the reason why his work was that way is because the exposures were so long.
mm,
Um,
yeah, a
just
lot.
in order to kind of create that, so you weren't going to capture a person in it, regardless, even if there were people there.
Yeah,
But he was also shooting on a large format too.
yeah,
Um,
almost 8 by 10.
but why do you keep the frames in there?
Because I've cropped them out, and I don't like it as much with them cropped out. That's what it comes down to. I'm really greedy for space, and if I included something, if I see it on my film and I crop it out, it bugs me.
Mm.
And I go, well, it's part of the environment that's there that I captured. Why should I crop it out?
It's just as important to you as the subject.
At one point, when I was still working for that magazine Architecture, there was all of a sudden that one day, I don't know why, there was a new art director, and I hadn't met him, and I was sent down to Baton Rouge to shoot a new museum down there, and I spent 3 days down there shooting this museum, and to get one picture, I had to go to the building across the street, and I had to hang over the edge to get the left and right sides to be what I wanted them to be in this horizontal double page spread that I was shooting. And I have a great fear of heights, but I put that away when I'm working. So I put myself in precarious positions sometimes to shoot. But I really went for it on this one because I'm like, I said I could do it this way, I could do it that way, I could leave these things out, but they're really important to me. And a lot of the times, the things that I put at the very edge of a photograph are really important.
Hmm.
And the and I got it. I got the picture in there, and I printed it, and I sent the print in, and the magazine came out, and the guy cropped it into a vertical. And I'm still angry about that. I yelled at him. I called him up and I yelled at him, and I've never done that before. And I'm like, "Mother, you don't know what I went through to get that." And he's like, "Well, and he explained himself, and he didn't care." And yeah, I don't know how much I worked for them after that, but it was more important to me to yell at him for screwing that up on me because my name was at the bottom of the page.
Yeah, yeah,
I didn't shoot that photograph. It looked terrible.
yeah,
I didn't shoot that as a vertical crop that way.
yeah.
I didn't risk my
Wow,
life to be seen that way. And I
wow.
was really angry about it, and this person didn't care. And I go, oh. And then I thought, well, what am I doing? I'm a commercial photographer. Of course, it's not really mine anymore.
Yeah,
So,
that's the tough part.
so I guess I'm just greedy that way. I don't know. There's something pretentious about including the frame, I guess, but I like it. If I didn't like it, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
I had someone buy a print for me once where they requested it to be cropped off. It was an old friend, and so I agreed to it, and it didn't look bad on that print. So I allowed that. But in general, if I show it that way, it's because I want it to be seen that way.
Yeah, I would. There's just something to me I like about it.
Yeah,
I like, in a lot of times, I like seeing especially when you're shooting that 6x7 roll film, seeing the count
yeah,
on the side.
yeah.
There's just something about it. I
I
like
think
it.
it works. Um, Urban Jungle, we spoke a little bit about, but it's the feeling of being in nature in the city. It's really that simple. L- you're not. I guess you're not that familiar with Manhattan. To get out of Manhattan is stressful. It's very hard to get out of the city to get into real nature. It's one reason I don't leave the island that much is just the stress of getting through the traffic and out of the city through one of the tunnels or getting on the subway or any way that you can get out of here. It's like a prison here. You need to stay inside. So once you break free that 2 hours of crap to get out into nature, like not crap that it's crappy, but just stress of cars, and then you can get out into nature and enjoy yourself. But the thing is, once I'm out there, I get nervous. I want to go back to the city. I always feel like I'm missing something if I'm not here. So for me, going into these type of places was a little bit of balancing the kind of feeling of being in nature with the comfort of still being in the city where, I'm not going to have a bear jump out at me.
Hmm.
I might
Do you
have
feel
a
do you
dog
feel
jump.
do you feel like there's a primal need almost inside of
Yeah,
us for
yeah,
these
yeah,
green spaces?
yeah, yeah. There
Yeah.
is, yeah,
Yeah.
there is, and I made friends with a lot of gardeners who run a lot of these places, and realized that there's a class of people, a group of people that are more insane than I am, and they call themselves gardeners. Lovely
S-
people, but
City
that's
gardeners
why
too.
we get along. They're a bunch of wackos, worse than
Yeah.
photographers. But yeah, they're plant people, and they cultivate really nice spaces, and somehow many of them have accepted me, which it's kind of like what was that movie Freaks? I kind of feel like the freaks have accepted me.
Well,
It's
it's
going to get canceled by the New York Gardeners now, but
yeah, yeah, they're gonna see this. Yeah, we heard what you said. Yeah.
so yeah, there's these spaces.
Now, let
There's
me
a
be clear.
history behind these spaces.
I'm curious though. Like these are just in Manhattan though. These are on the island.
Yeah, this is all Manhattan. They're all downtown. This one on the left is in Central Park, but generally they're all downtown. Um, yeah, this is all in my neighborhood. Uh, the one on the right here is in Midtown, but it's near my camera repair place. Um, the one on the left is near me. This is also near me. Actually, yeah. If you look at my Instagram today, I posted something that was shot in the same space today. Um, but it didn't look like this. So, nature in the city. Um, and then trees. So, trees kind of grew out of nature, the urban jungle one, where there's a lot of interesting trees in the city. There's no thought behind this. This is a crowd pleaser. Um, there's a lot of interesting trees in the city. There's a lot of trees in the city. There's a lot of interesting trees in the city. But what you don't find are trees that actually are set up or have are visible in a way where they look good and the background doesn't distract from them photographically. So this is one particular one that's in my neighborhood that I have shot 38 times now.
Oh wow.
And I just keep going back, and I'm very lucky that I'm allowed into this. It's not a public garden, but it is open to the public sometimes, but they close it off for me. I go back 5-ish times a year. Um, it's called a red bud. It blooms with this red in the spring that you can see. Um,
Mhm.
and I go back and I shoot it, and I've shot it mostly 8x10, a couple 4x5s, and a couple 11x14s, a couple 5x7s, just to mix it up. It's a crowd pleaser. People like it. There's no reason for this other than, again, it's a form of self-portrait, and it's quite rare to get a tree that stands out from its background in a pleasant way.
Well, and then it's a strange shape as well.
Yeah. So again, this is reflective. I see myself somehow in this because it's reflective of, you know, this tree is nearly dead. It's at the very end of its lifespan. It won't last much longer. Um, each season, its leaves are a little weaker. Its red is a little less strong. Um, you know, my skeleton could be straighter. And it's not getting straighter every year. Let's put it that way. So I like this old man. He's bent over, but he's still there. Um, Here's another one near me. Again, this one is really only good because of the building behind it. It's a nice one, but if it had a different colored building or different size building behind it, it just wouldn't work. The one on the right here, I've only gotten once because I've never had a good background behind it before. It's never stood out well, and I really dislike the building on its right. Um, but yeah, it doesn't look that good anymore. But that one day it did. Um, this one on the right has grown too tall now for me to shoot it. It no longer works with its surroundings. The one on the left was taken down in a storm. It's actually almost in the picture on the left here. It's almost falling. So these things are, they're very temporal. This one has been, this was a one that I really like in Greenwich Village. But it's been scaffolded because they're doing work on the buildings around it, so I can't see it anymore. I don't know if I'll be able to. It's also overgrown its space, so I might not be able to shoot this one anymore either.
You really like the ones you can get full framed and that
That's
almost
the only way that I'll shoot them.
yeah, and then also like the building in some way kind of um frames it in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Just like that.
This one here on the left is not really. I got this during the shutdown. This is Washington Square Park. It's never this empty. And it's only a couple days of the year where there's enough green to hide what's going on behind it, and not enough green that you can actually see the form of the tree like this. Because when it has leaves, it doesn't look like this. And when it's completely bare around it, you see way too much of what's going on, so your attention goes to the park.
Yeah.
It's a difficult one, that one. So I've never been able to get it again, and it's usually way too many people in the park, even way early in the morning. Again, this one I shoot at different times of the year. This one you'll see at different times of the year it works, and at different times it doesn't. Glamorous New York, I spoke a little bit about. So it's just, you know, as digital has taken over, as modern design has taken over, the textures and the colors have become too tasteful in New York City. Um, so Glamorous New York is really about a certain feeling of a time of the city where things weren't perfect. Um,
Mm.
things had texture. Old things were still allowed to exist.
Yeah. I'm reminded that brutalist architecture you're a fan
Yeah.
of, and yeah. So you're just wow.
So yeah, it's not like iPhone design.
No.
But you see here, like we're starting to get really tagged up here, and it's almost to the point here. Here, there's a couple cars, but for some reason they didn't bother me. Here's a conveniently placed lamp. These are old parts of the city. Stuff that's discarded.
Are they disappearing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they are. This place here is gone. Some subway pictures. This is yeah. I think this place is gone.
How's it is that do you how's that make you feel when you know they're gone? Is that a
Well, we
is
forget.
that disappointing?
Um, the first one might have been. The second one might have been. But it's to be expected now. It's like one thing after another, things just disappear, and then you realize things have to disappear. That's why I take pictures of them, because memories disappear too.
Yeah.
Um, it's just the way things are. Things can't stay the way they are forever. You wouldn't want them to.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it feels fine. But I was thinking the other day, like I graduated high school in 1984, and now it's 2025. So I'm farther from I'm farther from my high school graduation than my high school graduation was from World War II. So you make something out of that while I scroll through these pictures. It's just weird. It's weird to think about.
Yeah, it is. We were talking about where the center point of centigrade and Fahrenheit where they overlap, and
Yeah.
uh, that's a that's a strange one there to kind of think about.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think of myself as that old. I've been saying that I'm not 60 yet, but I've been saying that I'm 60 for several years now.
Mm,
To the point where when somebody asks me my age, I never remember. I just say that I'm 60. I used to say that I was 50 when I was still in my 40s. So I stopped thinking about these things, but you realize, like, I don't think like, because when I was in high school, World War II was not something that was even remotely close in time. Um,
yeah,
even though I was alive during Vietnam, I felt like I knew nothing about it. But World War II was ancient history. But
yeah.
how is my high school ancient history then?
It
So
just
here's another thing. Shift is more theoretical. It's just about the change of perspective. And that's really all it came down to. It's something I've always thought about. Photographing rooms. I said this, either we were recording or we weren't, but a room tells you where to photograph from. Um, but what if you take pictures from different places of a room? So I thought about that, and so what I started doing was, it actually started before shutdown, but I started practicing on spaces that were, uh, like, for rent,
Mm.
and I would just go to them, and I would take 3 pictures. You know, I'd take a step over, I'd take a step over, and just take those pictures, and then take a look at them and say, "What happens?" And so it's more meditative, it's more of a thought process, it's more of a kind of relation between the viewer and the space. Um, and during shutdown, more and more places closed down, and so I started to do it, and at one point, I stopped thinking about it, and I stopped doing it. Um, but it's a way they're all done on square cameras, Rolleiflex usually. Um, sometimes Hasselblad, but,
You know what's interesting is um, it creates a kind of movement,
yeah,
and you almost question, is the room moving or am I?
yeah.
Um, and
So,
so it's that's
th
really interesting.
that's something else that's going on, so that's a little bit more that's a little less surface aesthetic than the others, but it's still in the aesthetic realm, I think.
Yeah,
Here you'll see some pictures that you won't see the frames on. Most of these don't have the frames on, and I don't know why that is, but there's some other reason that the frames aren't on these. It's mostly because I started to try to take a picture of something with a different camera, and I couldn't back up far enough, and when I got the film back, I really liked what happened, which was the building completely filled the frame in an uncomfortable way, and it didn't include very much of its surroundings, and I thought, "I don't know what's interesting about this, but I wanna continue," so I just kept taking that camera out and filling the frame as much as possible. So for me, it wasn't about having the whole frame. This one you can kind of see the frame on, um, but it was almost like an architect's drawing of a building, like the frontal facade, and just presenting it as square and right up as possible.
I like that. I like these a lot.
And that's really all that it's about. It's just you'll see in almost every one part of the building is as close to the frame as it can be while keeping the image square or square-ish. Maybe some of them are out of square. I don't know. Maybe my thought process wasn't as rigorous as it should have been on this, but still, that's the basic idea. Or it's touching, or it's
Yeah,
just a touch. Um, but it gives them kind of a power.
yeah, for sure.
I
Almost a
find
portrait.
yeah, I find them graphically they're like close-ups of faces,
Yeah, exactly.
which I also like. This
Yeah.
is a white page. This tells you nothing.
It's my
Um,
favorite photo here. It's a great one.
and
Well done,
I don't
sir.
I'll have to ask whoever put this, like, where it was. Um, that's that. Should I stop sharing this now?
Yes,
Should
absolutely. Yeah, I just have a few more questions for you, and then uh,
do I need a number 2 pencil?
no, no, it's interesting. So, like, I'm curious. You have a very a large you
Yeah.
do a lot of professional work, and so how does this kind of fit into your world? As far as it seems like you have your own kind of personal projects that are going in parallel. So how does that fit in for you?
Um, there's no real, there's no friction between the 2. I'm really good at doing what I'm told to do.
Hmm.
So if you need me to fire in a firing line or something like that, I'll follow those orders. But excuse me. So I like doing commercial work where I have an art director and someone says, "Well, we need this. This is what we need," and then they look at the picture. That's not right, and I'm like, "Okay, I really want to make it right." So, and then I'll use the digital camera that they want to use and all those things. I don't mind that. My story about the art director was that was editorial. I don't really do a lot of editorial anymore. So editorial is different. You're paid very little. You do it for the recognition for your name in a magazine or something like that. Mostly what I do now is commercial completely, where nobody knows that I've done it. Um, it's for a client's needs or whatever like that. It's a good way to make money. And I've been doing it for a long time. I know how to get that done, so it's quite fulfilling. And
Yeah.
most people that do work with me still know who I am and what I can deliver. So um, some of them know about this work. Some of them I don't know. I mean, I have an architect that I work for time and here and there, and when I still had my single story show up at Center for Architecture, I don't remember that I'd seen that architect at the opening, and it was my first time seeing him since the show had gone up. I had a show of single story up at Center for Architecture in New York in 2019, and I hadn't seen him in a couple of years, or maybe at that point. And I said, "Oh, I don't know if I didn't see you at the opening. Did you have a chance to see the show?" And I'm not good at promoting myself, but I thought maybe I should try to promote myself a little bit, even though he's hiring me. And he's like, "Adam." I said, "What?" He's like, "I'm on the board. I'm the one who got it into." And I said, "Hmm, I should pay attention to these things."
Oh, that's funny.
Some of them do know about it, yeah. I've
Yeah,
had some
yeah,
that
yeah.
come up to me, even though they don't interact with me on social media, they say, "Oh, yeah, we're big fans of this project or that project." And I go, "Really? I would never have known." So there are people that like the work, besides you and my mom.
Yeah. Well, it's such a break from,
Well, that's
having worked in
you're not on
commercial.
my mom's payroll, are you?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you can
Yeah.
get this check, then I'll call her and see where it is
Yeah,
because
I'm getting
I
20
can't get
euros for this interview. Yeah. 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 I'm a cheap date. But I it worked.
my
It
favorite
worked.
expression. Cheap.
No, what I was gonna say though is, when you have that kind of commercial practice, having a personal practice is kind of hard to juggle. And so, like for me, I'm always curious about that personal, that side project, that side work, how it comes about, and what it actually means to
I
you,
see.
because
You
you know
you're
what I
you're
mean.
correct. You are correct. I have to give you this. You've never been correct up until now, but now you are correct. Now, I see what you're asking. When I was really busy editorially, I didn't do personal work, or I kind of let it go, and I realized that the personal work excuse me, the personal work I did at that time was not directed properly, and I realized I couldn't think for myself because I was always thinking to please, the photo editor or the art director, and I only wanted something that somebody else like, I pushed down my instincts to deliver. Um, I was also too busy, too tired to really focus on something. The editorial work slowed down after 2014, I think. I think a lot of budgets, I was still on the old budgets, which were low, and then the new budgets were too low to work for. So I didn't do a lot of that work. And I had more time, and just doing commercial work doesn't, you know, stop you from thinking about something because, an editorial project you associate it with yourself. A commercial project you really, since you're being paid really big bucks, like um you really want to give them what they want. Um
Exactly.
Editorial, you want to represent yourself while still being within their world. So I had more time to think. Um, I had more ability. Things worked out for me in a certain way that I rediscovered film. I rediscovered the big cameras after getting used to that digital thing for so long. Digital was so easy and boring comparatively.
Mm.
Uh, that the challenge of working with my hands and taking the film to the lab and seeing my friends at the lab, and you know and then also, to give it its credit, everyone shits on it, but Instagram gave me a community where my personal work in the past was boring to art directors, except for a couple. um I It didn't bring me commercial work. uh People was like, yeah, that's nice, Adam, that's nice, whatever. I don't Instagram, there were people that, pretty quickly saw it and were like, "Hey, this is really cool." And I thought, "Well, people like this."
Here's
People
your
people
audience. Yeah.
people like and I discovered a lot of people that like the MP logs, and I'm like, "Well, what's wrong with you people?
That's my audience.
You're not supposed to like this." So
No, it's
that kind of gave me more impetus to trust myself and to
yeah,
do more of that kind of work and to take chances and to say,
yeah,
well, nobody else would be interested in this but me, so I'm going to throw this up on Instagram and see, like, okay, you think you like difficult work? Well, how about this makes no sense whatsoever. People
yeah,
like, that's great. I'm like, okay.
yeah. Well, what's interesting is you get in a commercial world, you get really good at communicating through image,
I missed that.
and
Oh, through
yeah,
image, yeah.
yeah, through image at least, and so like what I have found, especially as I started to explore, the reason I went back to art school is because I felt like I had gotten almost too cliche in the way I communicated,
Hmm.
especially because I was taking on briefs and and kind of speaking some other kind of more marketing kind of message. And so I watching you and seeing you kind of have this side voice, this like real kind of your own interest. I was craving that. That's one of the reasons why I went back to art school. Is I felt like I didn't have it, and I needed to find a place to cultivate that. Plant a seed and let it grow. I still don't know if I have that, even though I have a hard drive full of images. And it's interesting. I do more editorial stuff
Hmm.
than I do like projects like yours. Even though I have them in my hard drive, they're just not fully developed. And so it's interesting to kind of hear you kind of talk about that. And one of the things is I've done this. I think this is I have some interviews that don't actually make it because of technical issues or what have you, but this is like
Like this one.
the 70. Yeah, well, it's gonna make it. It's gonna make it. I love it. The 70. This is like the 71st interview that I've done, and but one of the
I think you
things
got it right this time.
was, but what I'm finding though, especially about these projects that are more personal, it is about image. It is about the photograph, but it's also, like you said, a self portrait. It's also a way
Yeah.
of kind of thinking. And I think it's really interesting that you're allowing your subconscious to kind of activate an image, and then all of a sudden you take the photo and then you make sense of it later as you start to kind of put it together. And this leads me to probably my final question before I get to my last question is, um, having doing that and kind of allowing yourself to go through that process of it. I think in a lot of ways you're kind of inspired to take a photograph. You take it and then you make sense of it later, right? And have you found anything that's interesting to you? Anything that's interesting about yourself that you think is kind of interest
Mm,
that surprised you?
no, no, I'm not interesting at all.
Get out of here. Stop.
Re- I I think what it comes down to is acceptance.
Yeah, there you go. That's good.
I don't. It's just, you know not not better or worse than other. I mean, I am better than other people, but not worse than other people. I am worse than some people. Um, but how do I say this properly? When I was maybe a teenager in my 20s, I didn't dislike myself, but I really wanted to be slightly different, more
Yeah.
acceptable. Um, I was a bit I was a bit ruder. I didn't let people near me. I was pretty sure that I was an unpleasant person and I should keep people away from me. Now I'm sure of that and I'm okay with it. Um, and I don't mind that people know that about me. So that's made it a lot easier for me to photograph what I want to photograph because there's not much I can do about it.
Yeah.
Uh, the people are, so I've accepted myself for who I am. Um, there's only, tiny little bits of change that are possible. So I try to work on those things. But, you know, eventually I'm going to be me if I have a relationship with someone. you know, If they don't see the real me on the first day, they're going to see it on the third day or whatever. I'm going to make a joke that they don't find very funny. That's not very funny, Adam. Um, I can't keep it in, so it's gonna come out, so I just try to be myself right away, and, you know, pictures are a way of kind of, like, saying that without
Yeah.
saying it. So that could be part of it. But one thing I did wanna say is I'm not so much against art school. I one thing that, uh, for all the kids out there, I don't recommend doing it my way. Go to art school. It's a lot easier. Go to art school, have someone put you on the path, meet the right people, because that's really what happens in college or art school or any of these things. It's not what you learn, it's the people that you meet. I don't know these people, so that is a limiting thing for me. I know commercial people, but they're not in the art world. So, you know, my art is its own thing. It kind of exists outside of the art world in a certain way.
But it's
Um,
also not like tainted by it,
yeah,
which makes it refreshing. No, no, like I personally, it's kind of like a Windows computer. There's about 7,000 ways to do one thing. You know, you could, you know what I'm saying. You can either do it in 3 steps or 15, whatever you want. And in like,
learning that now.
what's that?
I'm learning that now. I've been working with a Windows machine
Yeah,
that runs my scanner on Windows 10 for a while. I'm like, oh my god, okay, I've
yeah.
been a person. So
And you could literally take 4 different routes in order to get the exact same result, which makes it brilliant but also confusing. But like what I have found though about this photography journey is that I have just as much respect for someone that spent years developing their craft in an art school than I do someone that kind of crafted their own way and learned um, in a lot of the ways that you did. That's actually how I did it. I didn't go to art school before I started working commercially, and I got very good very very fast, and I started to I started to realize, oh my god, this is something about me, and I had to know more, and that's why I went to art school. Now, do I feel like I got my money's worth out of it? I have moments. But as far as the people that I got to meet, you're exactly right about that.
yeah,
Um,
you can't substitute that.
yeah, I think that's the reason why I went. Did I learn like how to use a camera in art school? No, I did that on my own. I think I learned a lot more about my voice, and I'm always curious about people like yourself who have that kind of side voice and what you're interested in and how that develops and why and I love how you said it's a subconscious thing. It's the one thing that stands out to me in this whole entire conversation. So um, I think I appreciate your things at telling the art students out there keep going. I appreciate that. I'm sure they appreciate it too.
It doesn't happen so much anymore, but for a good period, I used to get calls from aspiring photographers, or they would send emails to me, and they'd say, I want to become a photographer. What should I do? Do you have any advice? I really like your work. And I would say pretty much the same thing every time. If you have to ask me, you've already lost. I mean, nobody wants anybody to be a photographer. The world doesn't need more photographers. You got to just keep going until you die. I mean, you can't say quit. You can't say no. You can't. Advice from somebody else isn't going to get you there. You got to not listen to other people and do it because you have to do it. Um, it doesn't make sense to be a photographer. I mean, you're not saving anybody's life. People, it's like putting a print on someone's wall is not going to, you know, keep them from dying. Um, it's only important if you make it important. It's only necessary if you make it necessary. And the only way to make it necessary is to not quit. So you need to have that drive in you because, like nobody wants me to shoot these lots. Nobody gives a goddamn about it. If I could stop tomorrow, nobody would care. I mean, I've got 216 of them now. If I had 95, would that be a problem? If I have 300, I mean, who's to say? Why do I do it? I mean, I shoot on an 8x10 film. How stupid is that?
It's very, that was my next question, was advice for photographers out there. That's my last one that I ask everybody, and you just gave it.
Never quit. Yeah,
Never quit. Yeah.
never quit. And don't listen. If someone tells you that you're bad, don't listen to them. I mean, you probably are. Just don't listen to it. The thing is, if you want to do it, I mean, most of it.
Well, and that's the truth. It's so funny. It's I used to tell people all the time. There was a point in time where I was a sales manager, and they would ask me, "How did you get to this point?" And I was like, "I'm the only one left. I didn't quit."
Yeah. A lot of good photographers that just gave up. They say,
Exactly.
not
Yeah.
enough money. It's, they're losing jobs to young people. It's not worth it anymore. It's not fun. I go, then don't do it.
Yeah. Hang it up. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I keep doing it because, well, why does anybody do anything? Because they do it because the doing of it is good. That's a quote from someone else, but the doing of a thing is good enough reason to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
As long as you think the doing of it is good.
Exactly. Yeah. It's interesting when you think about. Yeah. Well, I could go metaphysical here.
You should.
Yeah. Well.
What's the
well? Yes, sir. No. I never ever thought to myself that we were put on this planet by our maker, whoever that may be, to come here and do a 9-to-5 job, to get a 401k, and to just live out your life in repetitive fashion. I never felt like that.
It doesn't work forever.
Well, yeah, and one day you get laid off and your repetition stops, and
Usually
it
I'm
doesn't. Well, yeah. Well, and if you're in the federal government today,
that could be a Thursday.
yeah. But I always said that. So you might as well be doing something that you would do no matter if somebody asked you to do it or not. And if you figure out how to get paid for it, good for you.
Yeah, you got to try to enjoy yourself while you can.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that.
Happiness. It's really, you got to try to find some happiness in what you're doing.
Yeah. Yep. And if that's photography, then just keep doing it. Who cares what people think? And I love that. I love it. Actually, what's funny about this show? What's that?
And I'm glad I've solved all your problems.
No, you just added another layer to it. But I'm just kidding. You just don't quit. I'm like, yeah. Okay. All right.
Things too simple.
Yeah, I wish. What's funny is that this show, I do it because I love the conversations. I enjoy it, but so much of this is such a parallel to my life in so many ways. And so like hearing what you just said right there is something I think I needed to hear in this particular moment. And so this show for me in a lot of ways kind of helps me keep going. In a lot of ways I don't get paid for this. I do it because I enjoy doing it.
Have you checked,
And I what's that?
you checked your mailbox?
Yeah.
Checks, the checks might be there.
Well, I hope so. Please, please. I'm gonna go check right now. But the whole point of it is that like to that end, if you're doing it for money and you're doing it because of that stuff, then I don't think you have it right. Do it because it's like a subconscious need, like you were talking about. I love it. It's great stuff. I think we're at the end of the show now. And so this is the part where you get to kind of tell us how we can connect with you. I know you have an Instagram. You even mentioned it a couple times on during the show. So what is the
Yes.
handle for that?
How do you say it? At Adam underscore Friedberg.
Perfect.
At underscore Friedberg. And then there's different projects have their own pages, but you'll see a list there.
Perfect. So you can find you there. What about your website? You can also
Don't come to my house. Do not come to my house. Website is commercial work, and that's www. Well, this HTTPS.
You don't have to give all that.
www.adamfriedberg.com.
Perfect.
And there's a blog there too, which has a link there, but at adamfriedberg.com/blog is a blog because, I still have a blog, which I update once a year.
So do you have any prints or anything for sale? Do you sell those directly? If people were to want, what's that?
They're very expensive.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, I don't make low-end prints. I make silver gelatin prints, and I make C41. What are they called? RA4 chromogenic prints. So they're real prints. At the moment, I don't do inkjet either. I have done a couple black and white inkjets, but I don't really do them. I don't do low-end prints. I don't do cheap prints. But there's a price list on the blog.
oh, perfect.
And I take, cash or credit.
Yeah. First pay. I'm just kidding.
If they're very nice prints. Yes.
Good.
Rare prints are available of almost everything that you could possibly see on there. People can talk to me about them if they are interested in such things.
Perfect.
We can do that. We work with I work with the best printers. So
that's great.
While you're emptying your piggy bank, you'll be assured of getting the best possible print.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate is there any other way to connect with you that you want to add in there, or that's pretty much covers it?
It's a lot.
Instagram. Okay.
What else could it possibly be?
Yeah, perfect. All right. Well, thank you for coming on. It was great to have you.
In the sky, I guess. Sometimes I look up.
What, like we do a hand signal type thing?
Yeah, like that. I don't know. People get creative. I don't know who's watching this.
Yeah. We'll do a big AF sign or something.
Yeah, there's all kinds of contact things through. I'm pretty good at answering messages and things like that.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
I
appreciate having you. Yeah, it was great.
It was fun.
To all those that have made it this far, thank you so much for joining us on the Urbanaut podcast. If you like content like this, please like, share, and comment. You would not believe how much a like helps us on this page. So if you could support us by giving us a like, comment takes it even further, and also sharing is also a great way to support us. And if you want to support us in a little deeper way, you can also join our Patreon page and become a paid subscriber, as well as becoming a paid subscriber on our Spotify. And as always, We'll see you next time.